If you met me in the university hallway that year, you might only see an ordinary American guy. Backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones in his ears, cheap coffee in hand, always walking fast as if afraid someone might stop him to chat. I was a sophomore, majoring in communications, living in the East Dorm on campus, where evenings were always noisy with laughter, music, and heterosexual love stories told so loudly it seemed like the whole world was the same. But my world wasn't. I am a guy who loves guys, and Trevor is the one who made me understand that more than ever. I met Trevor on an early autumn morning, when the leaves in front of the arts building were just starting to turn yellow. That day, I was late for my American cultural history class, rushing to push open the classroom door only to find the professor already at the podium. I awkwardly apologized, my eyes quickly scanning for an empty seat. There was only one left, next to a tall guy with dark brown hair, who was bent over writing something in his notebook. I sat down, and in that moment he looked up. Trevor's gaze on me wasn't long, just enough for me to notice something strange. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the lightning strike infatuation like in movies, but a feeling like someone had gently tugged on a deep string in my chest. He smiled very faintly. "Hi," Trevor whispered, softly enough not to interrupt the class. "Hi," I replied, my voice a bit hoarser than usual. I don't know what he thought of me then, but to me, Trevor was like a question that hadn't even been asked yet, already making me anxious about the answer. In the weeks that followed, Trevor and I often sat next to each other. We didn't talk much in class, just exchanged notes, sometimes little scraps of paper with doodles when the lecture dragged on too long. Trevor was majoring in English literature, loved Whitman's poetry and old novels. He had a deep, slow voice, each word spoken as if carefully considered. We started talking more after class. At first about assignments, then about strict professors, which campus cafe made the best latte. Every time Trevor laughed, I felt a warmth in my chest, as if autumn wasn't just outside, but spreading inside me. But I didn't dare go beyond that thought. At university, freedom seemed everywhere, but for me, being a guy who loves guys still came with caution. I'd never come out. I was used to keeping a safe distance, hiding emotions behind jokes, and pretending I was just living a normal student life. Trevor was different. He didn't say outright that he was gay, but there were small signs. The way he looked at male couples holding hands on the lawn, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. The way he quoted poems of men loving men without hesitation, and the way he looked at me, sometimes too deeply for just classmates. One afternoon, Trevor invited me to the central library. We sat on the third floor, where sunlight streamed through large windows, casting long shadows on the old wooden tables. I pretended to read, but really, I was just noticing his small movements. His long hands flipping pages, his eyelashes fluttering as he read, his lips pressed together as if holding a private thought. "Scott," Trevor called my name. "Yeah. Do you ever get tired of having to be yourself?" The question came out of nowhere, making me freeze. I turned to look at him. Trevor wasn't looking at me, his eyes still glued to the book, but his voice had dropped lower. "I think, yes," I replied slowly, "but sometimes, getting tired of not being yourself is even more exhausting."
Trevor smiled faintly, a sad smile.
"I think so too." The distance between us was very close then. Close enough that I could smell the faint soap scent from Trevor's shirt, feel the warmth from his arm. I wanted to say so many things, ask so many questions, but they all got stuck in my throat. That night, I returned to my dorm room feeling uneasy. Trevor appeared in every thought. I wondered if he was thinking about me, what those looks meant, if I was imagining too much. I was used to longing in silence, but with Trevor, that silence started to become painful, because each day that passed, I wanted to get a little closer, to touch him even accidentally, to hear him say my name again, in that deep, real voice. I didn't know yet that from those very small moments, our story had begun. A story about two guys who love guys, in a world not always ready to listen. And I, Scott, was standing right at the edge of safety and longing, without knowing how soon I would cross it with Trevor. After that afternoon in the library, things between Trevor and me didn't change dramatically, but they weren't the same either. There was an invisible thread stretched between us, thin and sensitive, that could snap with one wrong move. I felt it every time Trevor sat next to me in class, every time he leaned over to borrow a pen, every time our eyes accidentally met and quickly looked away. We started texting. At first, harmless messages. Do you understand this week's reading? The professor was really grumpy today, but gradually the texts got longer. Trevor often sent me short poems, sometimes a quote, without explanation. We are not afraid to be alone, because we were never meant to be. I read that line over and over. Then I typed, "What were you thinking when you sent this?" Trevor replied after a few minutes of silence, "Just thinking about people who understand you without needing to say too much." My heart pounded. I didn't reply right away, but I knew he was talking about me, or at least I wanted to believe so. One Friday night, Trevor invited me to an outdoor movie screening on campus. An old film, a makeshift screen on the lawn, students scattered on blankets. The autumn air was mildly cold, enough for people to find excuses to sit closer. I arrived early. Trevor showed up a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. He handed me one, smiling. "I remember you saying you don't like coffee at night." "You remember well," I said, half joking, half serious. Trevor shrugged. "I remember the little things." We sat down, shoulders nearly touching. The movie started, but I couldn't focus. I was only aware of Trevor's subtle movements beside me. The way he adjusted his posture, the way he pulled the blanket higher when a cold wind blew. After a while, Trevor whispered, "Scott, are you cold?" I shook my head, but before I could say more, he pulled the blanket over both of us. Our hands touched. It was just a brief touch, but I felt like electricity ran through my skin. I didn't pull away. Neither did Trevor. We stayed like that, hands side by side, fingers close enough that one small move could intertwine them. But neither of us did. Our intimacy always stopped at that boundary. Just enough to make me yearn, just enough to make me ache. When the movie ended, we walked back to the dorms. The stone path was empty, yellow lights casting long shadows on the ground. Trevor walked slower than usual, as if not wanting to get back too quickly. "Scott," he said, stopping under a large tree that had shed most of its leaves. "Yeah." Trevor turned to look at me. The light softened his face, making his eyes deeper. "Do you ever feel scared?" "Scared of what?" "Scared that if you say what you really think, everything will change." I swallowed hard. I knew that feeling all too well. "Yes," I said honestly. "I'm scared of that almost every day." Trevor nodded, as if my answer confirmed something in him. "Me too." The silence stretched. I wanted to ask what Trevor was thinking, to say that I understood him more than he knew, but the words stayed stuck. Finally, Trevor exhaled, smiling lightly. "Come on, let's go. It's getting cold." That night, I lay in bed, the familiar dorm ceiling suddenly feeling strange. I thought about the tiny distance between my hand and Trevor's, about his unanswered question. I started to wonder, if I don't say it, will I lose something? In the days that followed, I realized Trevor was in the same state. He was quieter, his gaze lingering on me longer. There were moments when we were alone, in an empty classroom in the late library, where the air grew heavy with unspoken things. Until one evening, Trevor texted me, "Can you come to my room? I don't want to be alone." I stared at the phone screen for a long time. Then I got up, put on my jacket, and walked down the hall. I didn't know that by knocking on Trevor's door that night, I was stepping into a moment that would completely change how I saw myself, and love between two guys like us. Trevor's door opened almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting behind it for a long time. "You're here," Trevor said, his voice lower than usual. I nodded and stepped in. His room was tidy, unlike mine. Books stacked in small piles, old poetry posters on the walls, a desk lamp casting a warm golden glow that created a strange sense of coziness. Outside, the dorm noise echoed faintly, but in Trevor's room, everything felt isolated from the outside world. Trevor closed the door. Click. That sound resonated in me stronger than I expected. We stood facing each other, less than 2 meters apart. Neither spoke. I noticed Trevor seemed tense, his hands clenching and releasing, as if reassuring himself. "Scott," he began, then paused. "I'm not sure what I should say." "Me neither," I admitted. "But I think we both know why I'm here." Trevor looked at me for a long time. That gaze was no longer evasive like before. It was direct, raw, and full of unnamed emotions. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said. "Not with you." Those words made my heart twinge. I took a deep breath. "Neither do I." We sat on the bed. The distance between us was still there, but I felt it shrinking, bit by bit. Trevor told me about how he'd always felt out of place, even among friends, that he'd known he liked guys from early on, but always feared naming it. "I'm scared that if I say it," Trevor said, eyes on the floor, "I'll lose the people I care about." I turned to him. "I understand. I've lived with that fear for too long." Trevor looked up. "Have you ever liked someone? I mean, really liked?" I hesitated. Then I decided not to back down anymore. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "You." The air seemed to stop. Trevor didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me, eyes widening a bit, then smiled softly. But this time, not an evasive smile. It was one of relief. "I was hoping you'd say that," Trevor whispered, "because I feel the same." In that moment, I felt everything in me shatter and rearrange in a new way. No more doubts, no more pretending. Just two guys, sitting on a dorm bed, admitting what they'd kept hidden for too long. Trevor reached out, touching my hand lightly, as if asking permission. I grasped his. That hold wasn't rushed, not impulsive. It was slow, firm, and meaningful. He leaned closer. I could feel Trevor's breath, the familiar scent I'd noticed from the early days. When our lips met, I realized how many times I'd imagined this moment. But reality still overwhelmed me. Our first kiss was awkward, trembling, but it was real. Nothing to prove, no role to play. Just the longing to be seen and accepted. When we pulled apart, foreheads still touching, Trevor closed his eyes. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Me too," I replied. "But I don't want to go back to how it was." Trevor opened his eyes, looking straight at me. "Then don't." I stayed in Trevor's room that night for a long time. We didn't go further than hugs, slow kisses, but I'd never felt so close to anyone. When I left, it was past midnight. The dorm hallway was silent, but my heart was full. From that night on, our relationship began in silence. We didn't go public. To everyone else, we were still two normal students. But between us, there were things just for us. Late-night texts, longer than usual glances, study sessions where our feet touched lightly under the table. Our intimacy grew alongside the worries. I started to realize that loving Trevor wasn't just joy, but a risk. Every time someone asked me about dating, my heart tightened. Every time Trevor got too affectionate in front of others, I unconsciously pulled back. Trevor noticed. One afternoon, as we sat on the lawn behind the library, he asked, "Scott, are you ashamed of me?" The question left me stunned. "No," I replied quickly, but my voice wasn't firm enough. "Not because of you." "Then because of what?" I couldn't answer. Deep down, I knew I was scared. Not of Trevor, but of the world out there. And I began to understand that love between two guys doesn't just need sincerity, but courage. Courage to face stares, whispers, and potential hurts. I didn't know if I had that courage yet. After that question from Trevor, things between us became more fragile than I imagined. Not because the feelings faded, on the contrary, I felt myself loving him deeper each day. But because of that love, I was even more scared. Scared of hurting Trevor. Scared of exposing myself. Scared that one day, everything we'd built in silence would be torn apart by the outside world. Trevor wasn't as good at hiding emotions as I was. He started asking more. Not interrogating, but small, real questions. "Do you ever think about what if everyone knew?" Are you tired of pretending we're just friends? I always answered evasively. And each time, I saw Trevor's eyes dim a little. One night, Trevor invited me to his room again. But the atmosphere was different this time. No more gentle anticipation from that first night, but a simmering tension. "Scott," Trevor said after a moment of silence. "I don't want to hide forever." I knew, but I wasn't ready. Ready for what? Trevor asked, his voice not raised, but sharp. For people to look at me differently. Trevor exhaled, standing up and pacing a few steps in the room. What about me? Do you think I won't be looked at differently? Those words cut like a knife. I stood up too. I didn't say that. But you're acting like it. Trevor turned back, eyes reddening. Like being with me is a burden. I wanted to deny it. But I knew, in those moments when I pulled my hand away as someone passed, when I avoided sitting too close in public, I'd unintentionally made Trevor feel like something to hide. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice hoarse. "I don't want you to feel that way. I'm just scared." Trevor looked at me for a long time. Then he said slowly, "I don't need you to be brave for the whole world. I just need you to be brave enough for me." That sentence haunted me for days after. We didn't argue more, but an invisible distance appeared. We still met, still kissed in closed rooms, still whispered words of love when alone. But I felt Trevor holding back a part of himself, as if protecting against being hurt again. Then it happened. It was a Monday afternoon in the crowded cafeteria. I was in line when I saw Trevor across the room, talking to some of his friends. When our eyes met, Trevor smiled, that familiar, intimate smile. Reflexively, I looked away. I didn't think much of it then. I just did what I'd done for years. Avoid the gaze, avoid suspicion, avoid trouble. But when I looked back, Trevor was still standing there, and the smile was gone. That afternoon, Trevor didn't reply to my texts. That evening, I went to his room. Knocked. No answer. I returned to my room feeling empty. For the first time since we started, I feared I'd gone too far, not in loving but in avoiding. 2 days later, Trevor texted, "We need to talk." We met in an empty classroom, where we'd first sat next to each other. The air was cold and quiet. Trevor stood by the window, looking out, not turning when I entered. "I can't keep going like this," he said, without looking at me. "I don't blame you for being scared, but I can't be a secret forever." My throat tightened. "I don't want to lose you." "Then don't." Trevor turned, eyes full of hurt. "But if you can't stand by me in front of others, I don't know what we are anymore." In that moment, I understood I was facing a choice I'd avoided for too long. Continue living in false safety, or step out with Trevor and face it all. I didn't answer right away, and that silence might have been the answer that made Trevor decide to walk away from me. After that conversation, Trevor disappeared from my life in the most painful way. Not loudly, not angrily, just by withdrawing. He changed seats in class. No more sitting next to me, no more past notes. My texts were seen but unanswered. I saw Trevor pass in the hallway, headphones on, eyes straight ahead as if I'd never existed. Each time, my heart clenched. I began to understand what loss felt like. Not losing a lover in a dramatic breakup, but losing someone when they're still so close, yet no longer yours. On sleepless nights, I thought about every small moment between us. Every time Trevor held my hand before letting go. Every time he waited long enough for me to step forward and I didn't. I realized I didn't lose Trevor because of the world out there. I lost him because of my own cowardice. A week passed. Then too. Autumn turned to winter. The air colder. The sky grayer. I found myself exhausted from pretending to be normal. I smiled at friends, attended classes, did assignments, but it all felt hollow. Until one evening, I overheard 2 students talking in the library. "There's an open mic at the student center tonight," one said. "Trevor's reading poetry." His name made me freeze. That night, I went to the student center. The room wasn't big, dim lights, chairs in a semicircle. I sat in the back row, heart pounding as if afraid of being discovered. Then Trevor stepped on stage. He looked different, a bit thinner, but his eyes were clearer than ever. Trevor held a sheet of paper, took a deep breath, and began reading. The poem was about two guys, about touches withdrawn, about the pain of loving in the shadows, about one choosing safety, the other choosing to leave to save himself. I knew the poem was for me. When Trevor finished, the room was silent for a few seconds before applause. Couldn't clap. I just felt my eyes stinging, throat choked. For the first time, I saw clearly the consequences of my silence. After the event, I waited for Trevor outside. When he came out, our eyes met. Trevor started to walk past me, but I spoke. Trevor. He stopped. I'm sorry, I said. No more beating around the bush. I've left you alone for too long. Trevor turned to look at me, his eyes no longer angry, just tired. Scott, I'm not mad at you. I just can't keep making myself disappear. I know, I said, voice trembling, and I don't want to disappear anymore. Not with you. Trevor was silent. I continued, not giving myself a chance to retreat. I won't promise I won't be scared, but I promise I won't turn my back when you look at me. The silence stretched. Then Trevor exhaled softly. Are you sure? I nodded. This time, yes. Trevor didn't hug me, didn't kiss me. He just said, let's start over. But this time, don't make me pull you along. I nodded again, because I knew if I still loved, and I did, this was the only thing I could do. We started over slowly, not completely hidden, not flaunting, but real enough. Enough for me not to look away when Trevor smiled at me in a crowd. Enough for me to sit next to him in class, even if people noticed. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: we were guys who love guys. And this time I chose to love, even if it made me tremble. Winter came quickly after that. Snow dusted the stone steps on campus, turning the place into a quieter, softer space. Everything seemed to slow down, and our relationship did too. No more intense emotional waves, no more tense nights fearing discovery. Instead, small but real things. We walked together in the evenings, not holding hands, but shoulders always brushing. Trevor sat next to me in class again. When someone looked, I didn't turn away anymore. I didn't boast, didn't hide. I just was there with him. And that, it turned out, took more courage than I imagined. Some friends started asking, you two are pretty close, huh? I smiled, heart racing, but didn't deny it. Trevor looked at me in those moments, eyes both worried and hopeful. Each time I tried to stand firm. One evening at the end of the semester, Trevor and I sat in my room, the room that had once been my hiding place. Outside the window, snow fell silently. Scott, Trevor said, leaning against the bed. Do you regret it? Regret what? Choosing the harder path. I thought for a moment. Then I shook my head. No. I only regret not choosing it sooner. Trevor smiled, the most relieved smile I'd ever seen. He took my hand, without hesitation. I squeezed back. No one saw, but for the first time I didn't feel like I was doing something wrong. At the end of the semester, I went home to visit family. Trevor and I were apart for 2 weeks. Time enough for me to realize he'd become an indispensable part of my life. We video called every night, sometimes silent, just looking at each other through the screen, and that was enough. One night, Trevor asked, do you think one day you'll tell them? I think yes, I replied, when I'm ready. But this time, I won't say never anymore. Trevor nodded. That's enough for me. When I returned to school, I felt different. Not because I'd changed completely, but because I no longer hated my weak parts. I accepted that fear was part of the journey, but it couldn't decide everything. One afternoon, we sat on the lawn behind the library, where it all began. It was cold, but the sun was gentle. There were a few couples around, some looking, some not. Trevor intertwined his hand with mine. This time, I didn't pull away. I knew maybe tomorrow there would be whispers, maybe unkind looks, maybe people would leave my life when they knew the truth. But I also knew one thing clearly. I wasn't alone anymore. We weren't a perfect story. We were two ordinary American guys, who love guys, growing up in a world both opening and closing. We stumbled, stayed silent, hurt each other, then learned to come back, more honest. If you ask me what love is, I'll say, it's the moment I chose not to look away when Trevor smiled at me in a crowd. It's daring to stay, even when your heart still trembles. My name is Scott, and this is our story. Guys who love guys, learning to love each other, and learning to love ourselves, right in the middle of this vast university campus.